She's an English film director born in Kenya, best known for the hit films Bend It Like Beckham and Bride and Prejudice. Quirky comedies they may be, but most of her films also address social and emotional issues, explore the lives of Indian women living in England and how they must reconcile their converging traditional and modern cultures. Her upcoming film is the British-Indian historical drama Viceroy's House, starring Hugh Bonneville and Gillian Anderson. Did I get any bit of it wrong? Good, okay. And it's about the true story of the final months of British rule in India. And we're going to see a quick clip from it, I think. And Gurinder is going to join me here on the floor. Thank you very much.
I'll continue my tour after breakfast, Miss Redding, but in the meantime, would you put your heads together with the ADCs and rethink the guest list? From now on, almost half of all guests at all occasions must be Indian.
Yes, Mum.
Also, I want to meet Indian women. Thank you. Sarojini Naidu, Pandit Nehru's sister. Mrs. Aruna Ali Asif, Rajkumari Amrit Kaur.
Have you got that, Miss Noor?
Yes, Mum. Here are the riders.
I have a feeling, Pammy, that might be the only hour of the day I ever get to spend with you. Each day is so crammed. 2 poached eggs, tomatoes, sausages, tea. Lots to do.
Darling, did you know that 92% of the population is illiterate?
Good morning.
And that 1 in 5 babies dies before they're 4 months old?
Edwina, I could not be blessed with a more active, able wife, but sometimes we have to accept what we cannot change.
But we can change a lot, Dickie. We really can, and we absolutely have to. India's problems are not just political, they are social and economic. Almost half the babies born here die before they're 5. That cannot be the legacy the British leave India after 3 centuries. We have enough time to improve the infrastructure so that when we leave...
That is not why we're here.
Yes.
You'll wear yourself out.
I mean, I'll wear you out.
Good morning, everybody. We can't profess to be as scientific as the previous speaker, who's very eloquent. I'm talking more from a personal perspective. Watching the clip there takes me back to when I was at school and my first meeting with my careers officer when I said that I wanted to go to university. And she said, really, dear, I think you should think about a secretarial college. And I said, but I don't want to be a secretary. She said, oh, well, being a secretary is a very good job. You can really help someone important. And I kind of in my head said, no, but I want to be that person who's important. I don't want to be the secretary. And that really was a discerning moment in my life, in my career, because I realized at that point that the way that my careers officer was looking at me and my role in society was very different to how I saw myself and my ambitions for myself. And my journey through film really has been about challenging other people's perceptions on who someone like me is and is about. So when I started making films, my first feature film was about 23, 24 years ago now. It was called Bargee on the Beach. And with that film, you know, I made a pact that I wanted to show people like me who are usually on the margins of society in the center of the frame. And that really has been what I've tried to do throughout all my work. And with my most successful film to date, hopefully, prior to this one, is Bend It Like Beckham, of course. But like everything I've done, I've had to really work hard to convince people to back it, because as soon as you choose to tell a story from a protagonist of color, you know, or Asian, your chances of making your film and the industry trying to push your film diminish extraordinarily down to virtually 0. We don't have stars that can sell films in this world of celebrity. You know, the industry is an industry that needs to sell, distribute these films. Films cost a lot of money to put out there. So before you've even started to have the aspiration to make a film that talks about yourself and your world, you know, you've already got the pressure down on you of your film never getting made. So, as I said with Beckham, you know, that took me at least 4 years to get the film financed. And the responses really were that nobody is interested in a film about an Indian girl who wants to play football. And where will you ever find an actress, an Indian actress, who can bend a ball like Beckham? And these are sort of the responses that are used to inhibit people like me trying to use film to talk about my perspective. As it happens, you know, it's made me very bullish, and of course I did manage to get the film made, and I did prove a lot of people wrong, and it did go on to be a massive global success, but it came just after 9/11. I was editing the film during 9/11, so when the film was released, it sort of, in many ways, was welcomed post 9/11 because the world was sort of very bruised about what living in a diverse, multicultural sort of world meant. And whilst in Britain it was sort of picked up fantastically, because I believe the people who actually went to see the film, you know, believed in that vision of England that I saw for myself. In America, there were a lot of people, particularly Sikhs, who wrote to me saying how important it was that I had made them visible during 9/11 to show difference, that Asians are different, you know. So moving on from that, with Viceroy's house, so there I am again thinking, you know, it's been 35 years since anybody has made in Britain a big, epic Raj movie. And that, of course, was Attenborough's fantastic film, Gandhi. And I'm thinking, I want to do something. How am I going to get that through? How am I going to get that made? Because that's where I always have to start. How will I be able to tell my story as well as the wider story? The film, Viceroy's House, starts with a quote, which is, "History is written by the victors." Now, most people attribute that quote to Churchill, but it's not a definitive attribution, so I must qualify that. What I do know is that Churchill did say something along the lines of, "History will be kind to me because I will write it." And so again, that to me is a red rag to a bull, of course. With Viceroy's House, it's a film about the last days of the British in India, and the Mountbattens coming to India to hand India back, but instead we ended up with the partition of India, you know, resulting in about 1 million people dying and 14 million refugees. And it's still today the biggest refugee migration happened during partition. And the effects of it are still felt. You see it today in the tension between India and Pakistan. There have been several wars between these two countries. Myself, growing up in Ealing and Southall, it was always there for me, this idea of partition, because I, of course, didn't have a homeland. So when people would say, "Packy's out, go home, go to where you come from," I would go, "But I don't have anywhere, because my ancestral homeland is now Pakistan, which is a different country." So my family, Sikhs, you know, we were all from Rawalpindi and Jhelum, which was the foothills of the Himalayas, which was part of Punjab, which, of course, in the division ended up on the wrong side. And my family were, you know, my grandfather had built a big house in Jhelum, and very proud of it, and had put my grandma there, and some of my uncles and aunts who were young children had gone there to study. So during 1946-47, they were there, and then, of course, when the riots broke up, they were caught up in all the murder and violence, and had to leave with the clothes they were wearing. And one of my aunts actually died of starvation as they became refugees and moved to India. And so for me, partition was always something I grew up with. And at school, what I'd been taught was that Mountbatten had no choice but to divide India, because he came to India to hand India back. But because we all started fighting with each other as Hindus and Muslims and Sikhs, he had no option but to divide the country, to stop the violence. So in many ways, I had grown up thinking partition was our fault. It was our fault. So it was a very sensitive area for me to go back to. But then in 2006, I ended up taking part in an episode of Who Do You Think You Are? Which, again, one of the most successful programs in broadcasting history. And in that program, I go on a journey from Ealing to Ealing to Kenya, where I was actually born, where my family had been asked to move from Jhelum and Rawalpindi to Kenya to help colonize Kenya and make it safe for the British. And so my grandfather and his brothers were in Kenya doing that and ended up making this particular area where tribes were sort of fighting post the scramble for Africa, had sort of made it safe by introducing various different crops that the tribes would benefit from. And then very soon, two gentlemen arrived and started planting tea there, and that was Mr. Brooke and Mr. Bond. And so Brooke Bond Tea then became the vehicle for which my family then ended up staying in Kenya to help service Brooke Bond Tea and the English farmers. And really a lot of that work was about supplying them with alcohol, because as my family says, that's all they did was drink. So my father was born in Kenya and I was therefore born in Kenya. But the links with Jhelum were always there. As I said, my grandfather built this house there and my grandmother was there with some of her children during partition. So in my Who Do You Think You Are program, I go to my ancestral homeland for the very first time. And having grown up with a lack of sense of who I am and what I am in terms of my background, only my sort of history and geography lessons at school sort of telling me these things, except occasionally, my mother saying to me, when we were in Rawalpindi, we all lived together happily. I had my Christian friend, Christina. I had my Muslim friend, Fatima. I had my Hindu friend, Sangeeta. We were all friends together, and we all went to school together, and we all celebrated each other's festivals, and everybody lived together. And I said, so what happened? Why did you start killing each other? And she says, we don't know what happened. It was overnight. And my mum always used to say, I think the English did something. They put some black magic in the water and they made the trouble. But that was kind of it. And I sort of thought, well, I never really investigated it beyond that. After my Who Do You Think You Are, I was in Pakistan for the first time, arriving at the very town where my grandfather had built this big house, my ancestral homeland. A very important thing for me was being a British filmmaker, always talking about Britain with all my films. But here I was about to touch something that I had been denied all my life, given my colonial background. And in the program, I'm very belligerent about it. I actually say in the car there, I say, well, I refuse to call this country Pakistan, because as far as I'm concerned, this is pre-partitioned India. This is what this country is to me. This is where I am. I'm going to visit a town in pre-partition India. And so there you have, again, this sort of discourse of history, cultural history, that I had been told from a British perspective about what to think of Pakistan. I arrive there, the whole town welcomes me. They present me with a shawl. They throw flower petals at me. They say, we will help you. We will help you find your grandfather's house. You're our daughter. You belong here. You're part of us, So that, of course, started me off. And then eventually, when we did find the house, because it took us a while to find the house, I'm very happy when I see the house. And it's got beautiful wooden engraved pillars of Jaipuri wooden carvings, and it's a big 5-story building and in a courtyard with these lovely wooden pillars, and I sort of walk around for a minute feeling very happy until I'm told what actually happened in that house. But not only the sort of horrors of what happened during partition, but now the house is filled with 5 families who themselves were all refugees from India living in that house. And so it was at that moment that I realized the real tragedy of partition and the fact that one community upped and left and another community came in the most sort of bizarre way. And at that point, I decided I was going to make a film on partition. But what film? And how is history written by the victors? What I had to go by were Julian the Crown, Gandhi, as I said, Far Pavilions, Passage to India. These were the big Raj movies that I had grown up with. How was I going to make my own mark? So I wanted to tell a story about ordinary people, the people's partition. But I knew it would be very hard for me to make a film just about the ordinary people because I would never get it financed, you know. So I had to think, how can I talk about this discourse? How can I talk about history in a narrative that will be accessible and appeal to a global audience? And so I came up with the concept of upstairs, downstairs. Again, a very British way of telling the story. I wanted you to feel like you're watching a Raj movie. You know, I wanted to make it on the scale of David Lean's films or Attenborough's Gandhi. I wanted it to be epic. And I wanted you to enter into this world, but I absolutely, make no mistake, want you to know you're entering it and you're going to be watching this film from a very distinct perspective. It is a British Asian perspective. This film could not have been made in India by an Indian. It could not have been made in Pakistan by a Pakistani. It could not have been made by a British white person. You know, it is that unique combination of being British and Indian that is specific to this film. Now, I feel that if I don't make films, I have not recorded our history. And that really has become my work. Right from the very beginning, my very first film, which I made for the BFI as a short, which was called I'm British But, which talked about our dual identities as British and Indian. I've recently handed all that archive from then till today over to the BFI. And as I was putting it through, going through everything, I realised what I have there is virtually 30 years of British Asian history on celluloid. And if I hadn't have put those films out there, if I hadn't have done that, that history would have been lost. So coming back to Viceroy's house, when you watch the film, I'm not going to give it away, but when you watch the film, you'll see how at great pains I am to tell the story, not only of the leaders upstairs, Mountbatten, Jinnah, Nehru, Gandhi, but the bearers, the translators, the butlers, the cooks, the people who would normally be extras and in the background of other movies are suddenly centre stage. We learn about the historic events going on upstairs, but we also emotionally are drawn into how they affect ordinary people. And that's the thing. It's who do you emotionally invest in? I want you to invest in the people, the people's partition, but I know that you are used to seeing it from the perspective of the leaders. And that is something that it's important that I've played with in this film. For example, who has the first dialogue? In a film, whoever has the first dialogue almost sets the pace, the tone for that film. The audience goes, okay, I know who I'm following. I know what the film's going to be about. I know whose perspective is. In my film, it's very interesting. The very first line of dialogue you hear is from the English controller who is telling a worker to clean up the tennis courts as the Viceroys are arriving. Viceroy and Viceroy are arriving. And then the first real dialogue you have, and this was very important, is between two workers, between an undervalet and a valet. And they are standing next to a bust of Queen Victoria, and they talk about how you know, these are good times. The British Raj is ending. Queen Victoria never even set foot here. But now Mountbatten's coming, he can take his great-grandmother home with him. And just that scene suddenly makes you think, oh, hold on, the pictures tell me I'm watching a Raj movie, but, oh, hold on, am I going to be uncomfortable here, or am I going to go with this? But I think our audience today, we're so sophisticated, particularly post-Brexit and Trump. You know, people want stories that talk about us as being diverse, talk about us, talk about points of view that are different. And so by starting in that way and then carrying on in that way, it's a very bold take on history. It's a very different take on history. And as you watch the film, you'll see that one of the biggest challenges is I have challenged the whole narrative of what happened at the end of British rule. The story that I had been told at school was not correct. Partition was actually a political act. It was orchestrated for geopolitical reasons, much like we see what's happening in the world today. So the story that I had been living with, you know, throughout my childhood, I've now been able to put to rest. And in taking on that very sort of British colonial view of history, I've been able to challenge not only what really happened, I believe, at that time, with the help of top-secret British documents that are in the British Library, but I've also been able to remind us of the consequences of what happens when you follow the politics of hate and the politics of division. And in terms of what's happening today, my film, I hope, is a timely reminder of new historical discourses and how history will judge what we do today to combat what is threatening our plural society. And just to finish, you know, I did, as I said, I made my first film 24 years ago, my first feature film 24 years ago, and have spent that time sort of documenting our lives as British Asians. 24 years later, I'm still the only British Indian woman making a living, making feature films in this country. And with that one statistic is everything you need to know about how hard it is to make films with a different discourse to the predominant one. And history, I feel, is truly written by the victors if we are allowed to do it. Thank you.